Shabbat Shalom again.
Shabbat Shalom.
Let's play a game. See if you can guess what the following items have in common. The weather. Other drivers. Internet speed. Customer service. Small aches and pains. Professionals who don't act professionally. Your significant other, your kids, your parents, your siblings. The price of gas. The price or the quality of food, clothing, or pretty much any other item you might purchase. Whatever government and administration is in office at the time. Have you figured it out? What is it? Okay, okay, good. Things you can't control, annoyances. Small talk. Perfect. You're feeding right into my sermon. Good, you just said it. So according to a recent survey, these are the top 10 subjects about which we Americans complain the most. So let's think for a moment about the way we, ourselves, each of us, communicates. The type of information and commentary we each put out there into the world, whether about any of those topics listed before or anything else in our lives. Be honest. In the aggregate, what percentage of what you put out there do you think is positive? Negative? If you had to tabulate it, what's your compliment to complaint ratio? I recently read that social psychologists tend to agree that an 80-20 ratio, 80% positive and a 20% negative ratio, is understood as healthy. But according to that same research, in actual practice, most of us find ourselves at best at about a 50-50 split, and more likely normally at 20-80. It's not a modern phenomenon. Consider this week's Torah portion. Ever since halfway through the book of Exodus, all the way until this week's Torah portion, so we've covered really nearly 2 full books of Torah. Our people have been sitting at the bottom of Mount Sinai, receiving rules and regulations from God to guide them on their journey toward the Promised Land, spending time in what we might think of as an ancient sort of spiritual driver's ed. Hours upon hours of learning the so-called rules of the road before ever being handed the keys, as it were, to their journey. And it's only this week, after 2 years of learning and listening and waiting, that it's finally go time, and our ancestors are told to start walking. And they do. And it is great for 3 days. And that's when they hit what they perceive to be a very significant obstacle. Not a confrontation with an enemy army, not a tabernacle malfunction. What stops them dead in their tracks is the limited dinner menu in the desert. The Israelites issue a collective lament, crying out, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There's nothing to eat here at all. Nothing but this manna," or you might know it as manna, "to look to." So tired were they of the proverbial same old thing, not to mention this totally imagined culinary delight of Egypt, that they commit a pretty big no-no, as it were, for a people whose survival rests solely on the whim of the same God that freed them from the very place to which they now say they'd like to return for its imagined, more expansive culinary opportunities. Our ancestors became so wrapped up in the perceived monotony and predictability of their lives that they lost all perspective, and they were literally blinded to the miracle that God's daily provision of manna was. They saw only what they perceived they lacked and ignored what was literally falling on top of their heads, sustenance in abundance. It's no surprise then that in next week's Torah portion, our ancestors' proclivity for seeing the negative and complaining ultimately causes them to reject the promised land itself when they were actually standing in it already. But our complaining isn't that bad, right? What's so awful about me telling my friend about how irritating my husband is? When it's been like 100 degrees for 3 days in Chicago and it's not even the end of June, can't I at least lament that fact with the people around me? Can't I be comforted by that shared experience of pain? It's just venting. And that shared understanding will make me feel better, right? And that's where it's actually wrong. As it happens, every time we complain about anything, it causes the release of the stress hormone cortisol, which ultimately weakens our immune system, increases our blood pressure, and risk of heart disease, and a plethora of other negative ailments as well. It's very unhealthy for us. But there's more. It turns out complaining is actually bad for your brain. As you might remember from biology class, maybe some of you are in biology class or were just in biology class recently, synapses that fire together, wire together. Do you remember that? I was taught that many, many, many years ago. Every thought we have, positive or negative, causes one synapse to fire a chemical to another synapse, connecting them with an electrical signal or bridge. And this bridge exists so that an electrical signal can cross it, carrying along its charge the relevant information that we're thinking about. But every time this charge is triggered, the bridge gets stronger, and the synapses grow closer together in order to decrease the distance of the charge that it has to cross. The brain literally makes itself more efficient to make it simpler and more likely for the same thought to trigger the next time. We'll put it more simply. Having one thought makes it easier for you to have that very same thought again. And this works virtually for the positive, but pretty viciously for the negative too. Not only do repeated negative thoughts make it easier to think more negative thoughts, but they also make it more likely that negative thoughts will just come to us out of the blue, training us to be negative. Basically, thinking negatively consistently starts to change us and make our personality tilt to the negative. And it's contagious. When we see someone experiencing an emotion, whatever it is, happiness, sadness, anger, our brains try out those same emotions to imagine what the other person is going through. And it does this by attempting to fire those same synapses in our own brain so that we can attempt to relate to the emotion we're observing. This is basically where empathy comes from. But it's also the same place where we get mob mentality. So what can we do to right our compliment to complaint ratios? Judaism suggests that we practice something pretty countercultural, that we learn to be satisfied with what we already have, as it's stated so succinctly in the 2,000-year-old Mishnah teaching, who is rich? Those who are happy with their lot. It's not that yearning for something better is all bad. When our desires directed toward improving the lives and conditions of others in our communities and our world, then certainly our charge is to do whatever we can to take action to bring our vision to reality, and that often begins with complaint. But when the negative critique is focused on something that's not in our power to change, if it's over already. Or the yearning surrounds additive material that proves excessive and really unnecessary if we're honest in our analysis, then we truly become just like our ancestors. And we blind ourselves to the miracles that surround us all the time, literally pouring on top of our heads. And we not only hold ourselves back from experiencing true and enduring satisfaction and contentment, but we indulge a perception of discontent that we will have been responsible for making reality. So a challenge, or perhaps an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. We've got just about 3 months by my calculations till Rosh Hashanah. Sorry about that. Believe me, I'm sorry about that. What would it look like to commit ourselves to the practice of getting our compliment to complaint ratios in proper order before the coming new year? Perhaps you might choose to go on a complaint fast. That typically involves a week of paying attention to the places where we find ourselves complaining the most, noticing that, and then instead, when we have something negative to say about any of those topics, we choose to be mindful and offer a compliment in its place. Training and retraining our brains. Or maybe we might choose a gratitude practice. This is where you take time each day to name and find 5 things about which you are grateful and not repeating that over the course of the commitment to the practice. It's challenging, but also incredibly powerful. Or maybe, whatever you do, you'll share that practice with the people around you that you love and trust so that they might benefit from the virtuous nature of your act too, and in the process transform your circles. I'm willing to bet that the results of this will be pretty positive. Our prayer book reminds us these words: days pass and years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. But the choice to open our eyes is ours at any time, if only we choose to do so. I pray we'll find the perspective to live our lives in this way. I know I'm committed to this work. I hope you'll join me. And if you're choosing to take it up, let me know. Maybe we can share our experiences over the next few months together. And if you catch me in a complaint, call me on it. You'll be helping me become a better person. And if you ask me, I'll do the same for you. Shabbat Shalom.